And a live picture now from the Midwest Republican Leadership Conference in Indianapolis. In a moment, we expect comments from former Tennessee Senator Fred Thompson. This is live coverage on C-SPAN.
Look at all those Republicans. Look at all those conservatives. Look out, Hillary. Woo! Yeah, old Hillary and Bill Clinton. Pretty good friends of mine. I don't know. Last time Joni and I checked, Bill and Hillary just don't exchange Christmas cards with us. I don't know what that's about. I have a great privilege tonight because I'm here to introduce our guest speaker. And many of you have seen him over the years, and so let me just tell you though a little bit about him. This is an Alabama boy where he was born. But he went across the line into Tennessee. And so he was raised in Tennessee, and that's where his roots are. He went to Memphis State, and he got his law degree from Vanderbilt. When he left Vanderbilt, he threw out that shingle, then helped on a congressional campaign. On that congressional campaign, he was moved by having, at that moment, met Ronald Reagan. He then became an assistant United States attorney, where he earned a reputation as a pretty tough prosecutor. From there, he worked on a Senate campaign of Howard Baker. Senator Baker liked him so much, he said, "I want you to come to Washington with me." He went to Washington, and this new, young, tough prosecutor ended up in the Watergate hearings. The country got a chance to see our speaker because in the Watergate hearings, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the counsel can ask questions. And there are two things that our speaker is known for. He actually wrote what Howard Baker is famously known for. What did the president know and when did he know it? Was written by our speaker. The other was during his questioning, in his being forward-thinking when no one was even contemplating this, he asks this famous question, "And Mr. Butterfield, were there any listening devices in the Oval Office?" And as you know, that was the beginning of the unraveling then of the Nixon presidency. From there, he took a break. He left Washington, D.C., and he went back to Tennessee and threw the shingle back out and practiced law. He, though, then took on the governor, because the governor then, what the court said, arbitrarily and capriciously fired a parole commissioner. The parole commissioner wouldn't do what the governor asked because the governor was trying to do favors for certain people who were in prison, and this commissioner wouldn't cooperate, and Fred took on the establishment. He was known not only through statewide, but garnished national attention. That national attention earned him a pathway to Hollywood. He ended up then having been in film and television, and he then parlayed that to go back to the United States Senate because he felt that he could learn a little bit more about acting by joining all those actors in the United States Senate. Having served in the United States Senate, I do want to pause and share this little story that, you know, all of us in our lives, we have been touched somehow by different people. And a lot of times they may never know the impact they had upon your life. Maybe at some point you tell them. Well, I'm going to tell a story about the impact that Fred Thompson had upon my life, and he may not even know nor even have remembered what he had done. And I never had the privilege to work with Fred when he was in the Senate. We worked on different committees. My colleague Dan Burton worked with him on government reform, going after government waste, and he worked on the Finance Committee, having done 3 tax bills, and he also served on the Intelligence Committee that helped prepare our special operations and our CIA operators to be able to fight a global war on terror in the dark world. So he has a great resume. But let me tell you about the impact that Fred had, and it was during the impeachment trial. I am on the floor of the Senate. I am giving my presentation that why, based on the facts and the law, that why Bill Clinton, as President of the United States, should be removed constitutionally from office. During that presentation, as I stood on the well of the Senate and I looked forward, right within the periphery of my vision Over Tom Daschle's right shoulder is Senator Patrick Leahy. Patrick Leahy is making faces at me. He's wrinkling his face, he's pulling his mouth, he's doing all kinds of these bizarre things, and what he's trying to trip me up. And if that weren't enough, when I turned and I would look and I would see this as I was still going on, then to the back I would have John Kerry and Jay Rockefeller kept walking back and forth, and Kerry would stop and he'd look at me and he'd throw his arm at me like this, you know, and they were doing everything they could to distract me. I paused. I took off my glasses. I'm wiping my glasses, but what I was really doing was taking a deep sigh, because I wanted to turn to the Supreme Court Justice who was sitting behind me and ask for a special instruction to tell Senator Leahy to stop making faces and tell Kerry and Rockefeller to sit down. And that's what I wanted to do. And I stopped and I turned to the left. And I looked and I saw Mike Crapo, a colleague of mine in the House who went to the Senate. And then I looked back down, and when I looked back up, my eyes caught Fred Thompson. And when my eyes caught Fred Thompson, he smiled at me. And when you smiled at me, Fred, you gave me the message, hey, I connected with you having been a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's okay. They can act like clowns if they like. You've got a job to do. Do your job and proceed. And that's exactly what I did. And you conveyed to me, in that smile, leadership. And your bearing was felt by me. Now, all of you have had the opportunity to see him. You've seen him on TV in many different roles. So you see him in Law and Order as that tough district attorney. You've seen him play a CIA director. You've seen him play a chief of staff. You've seen him play of the White House. You've seen him play a rear admiral of USS Enterprise and Hunt for Red October. You've also seen him play a president, Ulysses S. Grant. But here's what I would submit to all of you. I would submit that the gentleman that you're about to hear from has the demeanor of a gentleman. He has the courage of a warrior. He has the intellect of a scholar. He also has the vision, the leadership, and the bearing to be the next president of the United States, Fred Thompson.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Wow, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that warm reception and who you are and what you're doing. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. Steve Buyer, I wish I could claim a little credit for anything that you have done, my friend. I can't tell you how much that introduction means to me, but just tell me one thing. When Pat Leahy's making a bad face, how can you tell? I'm sure that'll be taken in the spirit in which it's given. Steve, thank you so much. You've meant so much to this state and this country. And I want to thank Mike McDaniel and Rex Early and Chairman Murray Clark and all the distinguished guests here this evening. My old friend Dan Burton, seems like, I run into folks from Indiana everywhere I go. It's important in my life. David McIntosh is now a great friend and great advisor, and he and his wife Ruthie being here means a whole lot to me. I want to tell you that. And I want to mention my old friend and colleague Dan Coates, too. I tell you, after I left the Senate, one of the most rewarding things that I got to do was after the President Bush called me up and asked me to help Chief Justice John Roberts, then Judge John Roberts, go on the Supreme Court of the United States. Dan Coates helped Judge Alito. I don't know how Dan feels, but I bet I can guess that he feels just the way that I do, and that's probably one of the most important things that we've done in our career, to 2 new judges on the Supreme Court who decide cases and don't decide causes. They decide between 2 litigants, the way you're supposed to under the law, and they'll be good, solid, conservative justices, I am convinced, for the duration. We just need another one or 2. And you know, the last time I was here, I was so impressive that a scant 10 years later, I got invited back. And I'm delighted to be back. My wife, Jerry, sends her regards. She's a DePaul grad, and for all those DePaul folks in the area, she's at home tonight with Hayden and Sammy, and sends her best regards. And I'm happy to be here with people who have their priorities straight. That hasn't always been the case in my career. I remember when I first started in the United States Senate, gave my first speech on the floor of the United States Senate. And I was all excited and talking about having Congress abide by the same laws as everybody else, which was a novel idea even back then. But with Senator Grassley, we got that done. Took it on, made my first speech, you know. Of course, there wasn't anybody else hardly on the Senate floor at the time. Nobody listens to each other for these things. But I was doing my thing, and there was one older gentleman, who I will not name, came up to me afterwards and said, Fred, that was a pretty good speech. I said, well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. He said, I just have one question. So I rose to my full stature, you know, with my little pocket Constitution in my vest, ready to answer anything he might have. And he said, tell me, was that a real submarine y'all used in the hunt for Red October? So I understood the priorities around the place right off the bat. But I do remember my early days in the Senate fondly. In fact, you can always tell new members of Congress, every once in a while they'll slip up and accidentally spend some of their own money. But they get over it. I was at a little function earlier today, and a lady, she's here tonight, but I won't embarrass her, but she came up to me and she was telling me that her son is coming home after 4 years in Iraq. And she says, as we talked on, she says, you know, son, a smile, says, you don't get a lot of recognition. But we're going through tonight. Everybody who is a loved one of someone serving our country in the armed forces, would you stand up tonight for a round of applause? We need to be reminded every day that if we were not the land of the free, if we were not the home of the brave, we would not be the United States of America today, and we would not be the country that has shed more blood in the cause of freedom for other people than any other nation in the history of the world. And our detractors and critics need to remember that about our young people in this country. I appreciate Steve's going back in history a little bit with me. I appreciate the introduction. You never know who knows you and who doesn't. How much you ought to kind of bring people up to date on yourself. I never take anything for granted anymore. I talked to a lady in the airport the other day, and it was 5 minutes before I realized she thought I was Dr. Phil. But, honey, guess who? Guess who? You'll never, Dr. Phil, you know. And, but as he went through that little historical journey for me, a lot of memories came back. My folks coming off the farm into a little country town there, and instead of going to school, instead of going to high school, they had to go to work. best parents that anybody could possibly ever have. I still have my mama back home in Tennessee. And because of their appreciation for education, it allowed me to do the things that Steve talked about. And I still wonder what they were thinking as they watched their teenage kid go off and marry and start his own family and kind of work and borrow his way on through school. And got to do those things and wanted to go to the United States Senate, put everything else aside, wanted to balance the budget, wanted to cut taxes, wanted to reform welfare, wanted for Congress to live under the laws as everybody else, the kind of things I talked about in 1994, still the kind of things I'm talking about today. And I got to go to the Senate, went from 20 points down, incidentally, to 20 points ahead on election night against a popular incumbent congressman. I was able to carry Tennessee twice by 20 points in a state that Bill Clinton carried twice. So I feel pretty proud about that, but I feel even more proud about being a part of a team that was able to do those things that I talked about. But I put term limits on myself, and I filled Al Gore's unexpired 2-year terms in another full term, and after 8 years I decided that it was time for me to move on. I could have run again consistent with my term limit pledge one more time, but I decided not to. People ask me today, why in the world would you leave the United States Senate when you didn't face any opposition after what it takes to get there? And I always say that after 8 years in Washington, I just long for the realism and sincerity of Hollywood again. But, got to kind of co-sponsor the Homeland Security bill and get that passed. Took 2 tries. Had to have an election in the middle of it. The Democrats didn't want to give the president flexibility in times of emergency to move people around, and the Federal Employees Union fought it all the way, but we finally were able to get that done. Got to serve on the Intelligence Committee. Got to travel in various parts of the world and meet with world leaders. But sometimes the most important things in your life happen under your own roof. And shortly before I left the Senate, I married a wonderful lady. And not too long after that, we found out that we were going to be parents. Jerry had never been married and never been a mother, and my children were grown. And it was a little bit of a surprise, to tell you the truth, but I knew from the first instant that another wonderful chapter was opening in my life. You can't look at that first sonogram and ever be the same again. And so when all this politics talk started some time ago, and all the back and the forth and the practical questions and the process questions and the flack and all of that, so Jerry and I talked about it several times and kept coming back to the question: what kind of country, what kind of world are these kids, now kids, because Hayden has got a little partner in life, little brother Sammy, who's 10 months old. What kind of world are they going to grow up in? What kind of country are they going to grow up in? And how many people get a chance to do something about it? So that little journey kind of gives the background, because why I'm here tonight. Everybody here has had their own journey. And the bottom line is we have a lot of things in common. I don't know about the particulars, but it all has to do with love of country and the kind of world they want to leave behind. The first obligation that every generation has is to leave this place a little better than we found it. That's what our parents did. That's what our grandparents did. And that's above all what we've got to do. My friends, I feel like that these next few years are going to bring decisions that we're going to have as a people, certainly on the president's desk, but on the American people's desk. as to decisions that are going to affect the future course of our country for many, many years to come. And I simply believe that on the present course, that we're going to be a weaker, less prosperous, more divided nation than what we have been. I do not say that lightly, but I think it's the truth. And I think the American people are ready for the truth. To me, when I think about it, there are a lot of different issues. Goodness knows we're not deprived of issues or solutions that people have. There are about three things that underlie everything else. One of them is national security. Our country's in danger, and it's going to be that way for a long time to come. I do not think that we have come together as a nation and come to terms with the length and duration and expense and commitment that it's going to take to meet the threat that we have in Islamic terrorism and Islamic radicalism. We are dealing with people who look upon this as something that's been going on for hundreds of years, and they're plenty well ready for it to go on another 100 years, slaughtering innocent people in the process. They think they're on track. They look historically at things and see that, 15, 20 years now they've been attacking us all over the world. Our embassy is the first World Trade Center, the USS Cole, on and on and on, with little response, and they've already defeated the toughest enemy, they say, and that is the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And things are just kind of rocking along according to Hoyle now. And they look upon Iraq as a front in the war, a current front in the war, not the war, but something to be dealt with before they move on. We have got to do better. We've got to be more united, more committed, more unified than we've ever been before. And yet you look at our responses sometimes as a people, and you see that's not the message that we're sending out. Whether you look at budget priorities, whether you look at our situation in Iraq, which some people apparently think that's all there is. You get out of there, man, our troubles will be over. Whether we look at the border situation and the fact that we can't or won't stop illegal immigrants from coming across our border, when the last few years we picked up thousands of people from terror-related states alone. We only catch about 1 out of 3. In the era of the suitcase bomb, where a small amount of material could wreak havoc on this country. When you look at our court system that's not made the adjustment to make a distinction between terrorists and enemy combatants and the average criminal in the U.S. court system, and warning of them of their rights, and you can't prosecute them unless you do, and having tell everything in open court, give them discovery, have them take advantage of all that information. We are oftentimes in our system not acting like we are serious. The debate with regard to surveillance, some people have a lot of problem with us surveilling telephone conversations internationally when Al-Qaeda suspects are allegedly on the other end of the line. I don't have any problem with that. But yet it's done begrudgingly and in increments and with great debate and fanfare. It's an indication and a demonstration of friends and foes alike, I think, that we haven't made the adjustment yet, that our memory of 9/11 and what's been happening to us for a long time has not had full impact yet. The second thing that concerns me is that we are doing steady damage to our economy, that if we don't do things better, it's going to result in economic disaster for future generations and a breaking of that commitment to leave this place better instead of weaker. We are spending their money. We're spending lots of their money. And instead of having an honest conversation among us, Democrats and Republicans together, about what we can do, instead of using it as a battle in 30-second television ads, we ignore the most important part of that conversation, and that is the people who can't be present. Our grandchildren. People who have not been born yet. They don't have anybody speaking for them in many cases. Oh, our economy is good now. There's no question about it. I think that, that's the greatest story never told, and President Bush does not get enough credit for his persistence as far as tax cuts are concerned. If there's one thing that should be agreed upon among everybody in this country, is the growth effect of tax cuts. And you can't solve any of these problems unless you have economic growth. And regardless of what administration you look at throughout history, the result has always been the same. But when you look down the road a little bit, you'll see that before very long we'll be using up that Social Security surplus. You know, the one that's in the lockbox that every politician in Washington's got the key to? That lockbox. We're living off the fact that we're bringing in more in Social Security taxes than we're spending. That's going to reverse itself. It's going to be the other way around before long. At a time when the demographic shift will change, and there'll be more and more people requiring benefits, fewer and fewer proportional workers. At a time when health care costs very likely will continue to go up. We don't do something about that. All those things working together will inevitably lead us to an unsustainable position. That's not my opinion. Not original. Look at the writings of the GAO, Government Accountability Office. It's a nonpartisan organization. David Walker, the comptroller, has been going around this country with people from a conservative think tank and a liberal think tank. I don't think they'll mind those delineations, but that's what I would call them. Good people in both organizations. Same thing, all three of them saying the same thing. And that is, what we're doing is unsustainable. Do you hear anybody talking about that? Because it's not going to happen between now and the next election. These are things that cannot be settled or decided or cured by a president, cannot be settled, decided, or cured by a political party. It's going to have to be done by the people. Have to be done by the people. Which leads me to my third point. At a point when we need to be more united and come together with a little bit of common sense and honest conversation about what the problem is, which everybody knows, incidentally, to have the guts enough to deal with it and say we won't use it as a political hatchet against one another. At that time, we're probably more divided than we've ever been before. We probably have more cynicism toward our leadership than we've ever had before in this country, well, in a long time. In a long time. At a time when we're seeing the convergence of these problems and all these other issues that are chickens that are coming home to roost, like energy, like education, like health care. And we look there in the Congress, despite the great fortitude and work of some, now has lower approval ratings than probably in the history of the country. You know, in order to have leadership, you got to have somebody that's going to follow. How do people follow when they don't have any confidence in what's being said or who's saying it? We can't go down that road forever. And we see a government that's now incapable, apparently, of doing some things that are basically common issues that the federal government has to deal with. We want a limited government. We want a government strong enough to protect us, but we want a competent government to do those basic things government is supposed to do. Time after time, we're seeing apparently we're unable or unwilling to do that anymore. Just a couple of thoughts as we go on this journey together. We don't have time to do that. the main thing, I think, that we need to think about, well, what are the principles are we going to operate? You know, a 15 or 20-point plan is great. Aha, I can beat him. I got a 30-point plan. All right, that's great. But what are the underlying principles? When the plans go asunder, or you can't get agreement on them, something like that. I think the United States, and we as its citizens, ought to remember our first principles, what I call our first principles. I don't think the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are outmoded documents. The Declaration tells us our rights come from God and not from government. The Constitution has a framework that's set up not as some kind of result of bureaucratic haggling, but as something that is designed. That's the setup, including federalism, including circulating rights of the federal government. Experimentation among the states, the competition among the states, because it promotes freedom, promotes better government, and it diffuses power. Those are not outmoded thoughts or outmoded doctrines, but you'll find every good idea that anybody has now has got to be federalized. I'm proud that on 2 or 3 occasions there was 99-1 votes in the United States Senate, and I was the one, because I said, this has been the state's purview for 200 years. Why is the federal government involved in this when it can't do what it's supposed to be doing right? And an adherence to the principles to the principles that underlie everything that we do in this country, what all we stand for. The rule of law, the kind of judges that we were talking about, adherence to the rule of law, not something somebody makes up because they've decided social policy is not to their liking, but a rule of law that people can rely upon. That's what